Okay, so it's 9 o'clock, so we're going to get going. So if everybody could grab their coffee and head back to their seat. We've tried to design the schedule so there's lots of time to visit and get caught up and network. So there'll be lots of opportunity over the next couple days. So I'd like to welcome everybody to Canola Week 2025. My name is Sally Vale. I'm a research scientist at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and I also have the pleasure of being co-chair of Canola Week with Jay Wetter from the Canola Council of Canada. We're really happy to have you with us today, both in person as well as virtually. So Canola Week, the first day is the canola industry meeting. And this is a meeting that's steeped in a really long history, as it was started by Keith Downey, who was with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, way back in 1970. So this meeting's been going on for 55 years, and we're really happy that Keith is still involved in the meeting. Unfortunately, he's not here with us today, but we expect some good questions for him from him online. But Keith is still active on the committee and contributes to the program. So we're really thankful to still have him involved in this meeting. But back in the 70s, the meeting looked a little bit differently. It was designed to share updates on the crop as it was developing and deal with the legalities and the marketing of the crop. And these first meetings were really small and attracted about a dozen canola breeders and others, but since then it's grown. We're just under 350 registrants this year, both in person and online, so it looks quite a bit different these days. So as we gather here in Saskatoon, we acknowledge our presence on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. Treaty 6 promised benefits to help First Nations adopt European-style agriculture. The First Nations people knew the land, the climate, and they were good farmers. However, the government policy made it difficult to participate in broader agricultural economy and to hold on to that traditional knowledge. As we're thinking of traditional knowledge, we can think about Canada's canola industry and how it was built and continues to thrive because of our own knowledge keepers. So today we think about Indigenous knowledge keepers and their deep roots to this land. So for this event to happen, it couldn't happen without our sponsors. So I wanted to give a big call out to all of our sponsors this morning. First off, thank you to our platinum sponsors for this year event. We have BASF, Bayer, and Corteva. And also we have several gold sponsors: Ag West Bio, Alberta Canola, Farm Credit Canada, Genome Alberta, Genome BC, Genome Canada, Genome Prairie, and Ontario Genomics, as well as the Manitoba Canola Growers, NYA Ventures, and Sask Oilseeds. And we also want to recognize the support of Brett Young Seeds, Canadian Canola Growers Association, Cantera Seeds, Koch Agronomic Services, Syngenta, Blue Sun Scientific, Innovation Saskatchewan, NMP, and DL Seeds. So just to move on to a few housekeeping items, I hear there's been several questions about the location of the restrooms. So if you go out the door and to the left, there's restrooms just off the lobby that back up onto this facility. So this year, Slido, for our online participants, Slido will be used to submit written questions. But it's not exclusive to online people. People in the room, if you're shy, you can also use Slido to submit your questions. But we will have microphones for those of you who want to ask questions in the room. So to find the Slido code, you go to your name tag and scan the QR code. If it pulls up the program, you can switch it around, and there's another QR code that will pull up the Slido. So give it a couple tries. You might want both open on different tabs. And for those of you joining us virtually, the QR code will be coming up on the slides. So watch out for that. So in terms of our program for the virtual attendees, since you don't have the QR codes with you, you can go to the website and download the program or the agenda off of the website. For those of you who are with us today, the Wi-Fi details are on the cards on the table. And we encourage everybody to post on X along with us throughout the conference, and the hashtag is Canola Week 2025. And also, there is opportunity to collect CCA credits throughout Canola Week. So we'll be showing the QR codes at the end of each half day. So there's, I believe, 6 different codes altogether that will be shown just before lunch and just before the end of the day each day. So those are, I believe they will be shown on the slides, or you can talk to our hostesses at the back to get those codes. For our online attendees, try to catch them off of the slides that are that will be circulated. Oh, you can also ask through the webinar chat function in Zoom. So something exciting that's happening tonight. We will have a reception after we conclude the program. After that, we're encouraging attendees to join a small group dinner. I think this has been referred to as a dine-around. So we have reservations at 4 downtown restaurants, and there's sign-up sheets at the back. And so throughout the day, those of you who are interested in a networking opportunity, a chance to see some dining facilities in Saskatoon. You can sign up at the registration desk, but by 1 o'clock, so you have to do it this morning. So we'll be giving you a few reminders throughout the morning. So Canola Week doesn't pay for this dinner, so you're responsible for your own dinner, but it's an opportunity for some extra networking and maybe a chance to meet some new people from the industry. Another thing is tomorrow morning before Canola Discovery Forum, Chris Mancher from the Canola Council is going to be hosting a discussion about the canola steering groups. He had circulated a survey about this earlier on in the fall, and he's going to present the results from that. So that will happen over breakfast in this room, so from 8 to 9. Unfortunately, it's not open to virtual attendees, but the slides will be circulated afterwards. And one last note is that this year, in lieu of speaker gifts, we're going to be making a donation to an organization called the Friendship Inn, which is just a few blocks from here, that serves hot, nutritious meals 365 days of the year to people in need in downtown Saskatoon. So with that, we'll move into the program. So I just wanted to introduce Mark Smith, who is going to be the online moderator for this session. So Mark's a longtime committee member of Canola Week, and he'll be reading out the questions off of Slido. And with that, we will move into our first presenter of the day, who is Curtis Rempel, who's the Vice President of Crop Production and Innovation from the Canola Council of Canada, and he's going to make some remarks from the Canola Council.
Thanks, Sally. Good morning, everyone, and welcome here. As Sally said, I'm Curtis Rempel. I'm the Vice President for Crop Production Innovation at the Canola Council of Canada, and I'm pleased to be with you this morning as we start another canola industry meeting focused on production and innovation. I'd be remiss to start the week without acknowledging Dr. Keith Downey. As Sally said, Dr. Downey started this canola industry meeting 55 years ago, and we're pleased to see that this industry-wide collaboration has endured and evolved, as the Canadian canola industry has, into this unique opportunity to come together annually to learn, share, and help chart the path forward on canola innovation and research. My job today is to provide an update on the industry and what's on the horizon, both in terms of opportunities and challenges, and touch on innovation and the role it plays in the success of the canola value chain. A great place to start is to remind us that canola has significant value for the Canadian economy. The canola industry now generates an average of $43.7 billion annually to GDP and supports an average of 206,000 jobs and $16.3 billion of wages for Canadians. About 91,000 of these jobs are here in Saskatchewan, but the impacts of our industry are felt across the country and globally. The ongoing crush plant expansions will be driving economic growth in the years to come. This economic success starts with farm production. The latest data from Statistics Canada, released October 7th, 2025, indicated that planted canola acres this year were just over 21.6 million, harvested acres were just over 21.4 million, and production was just over 20 million metric tons, which leads to an average yield across Western Canada of 41.2 bushels per acre. Agriculture Canada, I think, will be updating their stats probably this week, and so we can watch for them because I anticipate yield numbers will be very strong this year. Collectively, canola yields across Western Canada were very good and approaching record yields. Canola as a plant continues to amaze us. Several of our private sector seed developers reported field-scale trials that achieved 100 bushels per acre, reaffirming the genetic yield potential for Brassica napus hybrids in Western Canada. Some of these plots were challenged in spring with low moisture, but production best management practices, along with later season rainfall, resulted in yields approaching the theoretical upper limit for short-season canola. However, not all farmers in all geographic regions of Western Canada had these average yields. Significant low rainfall and drought conditions persisted in parts of the prairies, including the Peace River region and areas within Saskatchewan. In addition to biotic stress, growers also faced some significant pest challenges which impacted productivity and profitability, including verticillium stripe, blackleg, cabbage seed pod weevil, and lygus bug. Cabbage seed pod weevil was above economic thresholds for the first time in Manitoba and parts of Saskatchewan as well. We'll be hearing more about cropping challenges later this morning, and we will be discussing these over the coming days. The canola crop quality is also being evaluated. Dr. Veronique Barthet from the Canadian Grain Commission will be summarizing or providing a summary of the canola quality for 2025 later on this morning as well. Canola-based biofuels continue to move forward as the world looks to reduce emissions and utilize renewable energy for feedstocks. Economic contribution from canola-based biofuel is now roughly $1 billion. Alongside the environmental benefits, canola-based biofuels are an important opportunity to support growth in value-added production and diversify markets, which increases value to growers and to the entire industry. Following the approval of canola oil for advanced biofuel production under the U.S. EPA's Renewable Fuel Standard in December 2022, canola continues to gain traction in this market with a steady and significant increase in the volume of canola oil moving into the United States. However, as a policy-driven market affected by changes in government and government priorities, there are still hurdles to overcome. Much of our recent advocacy in the United States has been focused on biofuels. Chris Vervaet, the president of COPA, will talk this morning about market dynamics related to low-carbon fuel standards, market opportunities, challenges, and ongoing advocacy to ensure that Canadian canola growers, processors, and our entire value chain can actively participate and realize the economic benefits from this initiative and this market. 2025 also saw some significant challenges in canola trade. The market to China effectively closed to seed, oil, and meal due to Chinese anti-dumping and anti-discrimination investigations and their ensuing tariffs. 100% anti-discrimination tariffs on canola oil and meal, as well as a 75.8% provisional anti-dumping duty on canola seed going into China. Following the canola industry's response to the Prime Minister's announcement on September 5th, the Canola Council of Canada, the Canadian Canola Growers Association, representatives of our organization's membership, and other representatives of the Canadian canola industry met with the Prime Minister, the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, the Minister of International Trade, the Premier of Saskatchewan, and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister on September 16th in Ottawa. This was an opportunity to highlight the significant impacts that the China market closure has had on farmers and the value chain, to emphasize the importance of reopening this market and the need for appropriate supports. The Canola Council of Canada staff recently returned from a trip to China. the second in the last 5 months, to meet with both government and industry officials. The visit was an important part of reaffirming our commitment to the market and advancing efforts to resolve trade issues that have effectively closed the Chinese market to Canadian canola and canola products. The Canola Council of Canada continues to actively participate in the ongoing anti-dumping investigation into the imports of canola seed into China. While China put in place the 75% provisional duty on canola seed as of August 12, 2025, the anti-dumping investigation, which was scheduled to conclude in September of 25, has been extended to March 9th, 2026. China has until that date to make a final determination on dumping. China could maintain the provisional duty, alter it, or remove it entirely should a negotiated solution be achieved between Canada and China prior to this date. The Canola Council of Canada continues to remain highly engaged on this issue, with the top priority of reestablishing market access through a negotiated solution as rapidly as possible. The Canola Council of Canada has been, and we remain, very clear that this is a political issue that requires a political solution, negotiated at the highest levels between our two governments. In parallel, we continue to engage, work with, and call on the government to put into place appropriate supports to farmers and the value chain in the face of this market closure. At the same time, we are also highly focused on the United States and the pending CUSMA review and other valued export markets for Canadian canola seed, oil, and meal. This work, together with continued targeted market development, both in terms of new geographic markets and also new product end uses, remains critically important to the continued growth of the Canadian canola industry. The real opportunity for the canola industry is forward-looking but builds on our past. That opportunity is our capacity for innovation. Only innovation can create value. Capitalism works best when there are many companies innovating and creating value. The canola sector in Canada is extremely fortunate that we have a vibrant private sector that continuously invests in innovation and research. The sector is fortunate that we have farmers open to innovative products, technologies, and practices that fit their farming operations. We are also fortunate to have strong universities and federal scientists who value partnerships with the private sector and a value chain that recognizes how strong public-private partnerships can improve research utilization. This will be a focus on the days to come, and I will expand on this shortly. The Canola Council of Canada has also recently launched a refurbished strategic framework that positions the organization and the industry to seize future opportunities while staying resilient in a changing global environment. Developed in collaboration with our board, broader membership, and other stakeholders, this framework reflects their feedback and input as well as the evolution of the industry over the past several years. The strategic objectives are to sharpen our focus, concentrate on areas of highest impact, and continue operating with efficiency and clarity. The Canola Council has restructured the organization to deliver on areas our members have indicated are critical to the industry's continued growth and success, including advancing market access, amplifying the value of Canadian canola, and most critically, enabling innovation. The Canola Council of Canada will provide more detail on this strategic framework in the coming months. On a personal note, this restructuring has been very, very difficult for me, and I haven't had a chance to publicly thank my colleagues, my former colleagues, for all of the some of them are here today, for all of their hard work over the past decade that we've worked together longer. And so they remain dedicated to serving the industry, and I want to thank them, both myself and on behalf of the Canola Council, for that hard work. The Canola Council also does have an innovation strategy that was developed in consultation with our board and all of our members, including the provincial grower associations. The innovation strategy has 4 pillars: performance, precision, protection, and product. They provide direction for research projects focused on unlocking genetic yield potential, protecting yield potential, identifying best management practices which lead to increased profitability, and provide resiliency in the face of changing climate and new high-value uses for canola meal. We are halfway through the current Sustainable Ag Partnership, and the Canola Week agenda will highlight several of these projects. Last month, the federal government invited a number of us to have a dialogue, including all of our current science cluster partnerships, to initiate a planning session for the next policy framework, which will structure the next Ag Cluster research funding envelope. The initial meeting with agriculture, in prep for this initial meeting with the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, the Canola Council consulted with our provincial grower organizations and our other cluster recipients. The goal is to provide Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada with a coordinated message calling for more research funding for public-private partnerships in agriculture, given the significance of agriculture to the Canadian economy. The funding amount available for research has not changed over the past 12 years. We need an increase for Canada to realize the economic growth in the years to come. We anticipate program objectives being released following the Premier's meeting in Halifax in July 2026. We have also started the process of identifying our key research priorities for this next policy framework science cluster. I'd like to mention a few of our key innovation highlights as well. For expanding new uses and the value of canola meal, we have a groundwork project funded by the National Research Council of Canada focused on utilizing canola meal for single-use biodegradable plastics in agriculture. These products include bale wraps, horticultural mulch, packaging, and pesticide containers. We also have results from some of our new aquaculture trials utilizing canola meal, and these will be presented tomorrow. Projects focusing on higher yield and profitability include incremental improvements in verticillium stripe resistance and flea beetle management, increasing resilience to higher temperatures at flowering, and remaining competitive on nitrogen use efficiency and carbon intensity. Following the Australian system, we have completed the first year of an on-farm project developing a model to predict yield and oil content per acre based on soil moisture, in-season rainfall, and temperature constraints. Most importantly, we are making progress to determine the return on investment of our science cluster research. Successful innovation changes the paradigm, but also relies on adoption. Our economic impact analysis study puts research investment against the lens of adoption and will show how economic growth in Canada can result from adoption of new practices and new technologies that increase productivity and profitability. A portion of tomorrow's agenda will review this economic impact analysis in greater detail. So as we look back at 2025, we've seen some important opportunities taking root. We also face some ongoing challenges whose outcomes are not necessarily known. What we do know, however, is that the Canadian canola industry has a great foundation on which to build, along with a track record of innovation and collaboration across the value chain that will continue to unlock opportunities and keep us moving forward. Over the next 3 days, I know you'll have many discussions on the latest research, advancements in agronomy, new tools and technologies that will help support the next level of production and productivity for the Canadian canola industry. Your contributions and commitment have set the pace for our industry for decades, and your continued investment and teamwork in canola research and innovation is critical to our sector's success and resilience. Your contributions help keep Canadian canola thriving. Opportunities to meet the demand for canola will require continued innovation, advancements in production, access to new tools, and a shared view of where to focus our collective efforts. Everyone taking part in this Canola Week event has an important role to play in discussing, developing, and implementing practical solutions for canola production and our ability to realize next-level productivity growth. Thank you again to the sponsors who helped make this event possible, and thanks to all of you, either here in person and online, for being here. This event isn't possible without you either. I wish you all a great Canola Week. Thank you.
Thank you, Curtis. So we're going to move on to Chris Vervaet, who's the Executive Director of the Canadian Oilseeds Producers Association. And we're happy to have him back again this year to talk about how biofuels provide opportunities for Canada's canola industry.
Executive Director of the Canadian Oilseed Processors Association. I'm pleased to have an opportunity to participate in this week's Canola Week proceedings. Unfortunately, I can't be there in person, but I do welcome the opportunity to offer a perspective and an update on where things stand on biofuels and some of the opportunities, but also the challenges that face the canola industry as we embark on this path towards increased demand for canola through biofuels. Before I start to talk about some of the dynamics in the industry that are driving demand for biofuels and how that fits in terms of opportunities for the canola sector, I want to just quickly provide an overview of canola crushing in Canada. So in Canada, and the COPA represents 5 member companies that operate 14 facilities across the country. All of the 14 facilities crush canola, and 3 of them, located out in Quebec and Ontario, crush both canola and also soybeans. Overall, when you add all the facilities together, current crush capacity for canola stands at approximately 13 million tons per year. But we see that changing. We see a lot of expansion in our sector over the last number of years, with facilities expanding their existing footprints and a couple of facilities that are under construction as I'm giving this presentation. So what does the outlook for growth look like when we talk about expansion for crush? Again, in 2025, we have 14 facilities, but by 2026, we will be up to 15 facilities. And we anticipate by the end of 2026 to have approximately 15 million tons of canola crush capacity versus in 2025, where we had 13 million tons of capacity. So a significant increase in crush. And all of that is being driven primarily through the increased demand for biofuels and the demand that that creates for feedstock like canola and canola oil. Before I get into some of the specifics about biofuels, I thought just to put one slide together on some of the challenges that are facing the Canadian canola industry. And that really underscores then, as I get through some of the subsequent slides, on the importance of biofuels as a very critical market diversification opportunity for some of these geopolitical challenges that we are facing as a canola industry in Canada. I'm not going to get into much detail about what those political or geopolitical challenges are or have been for Canadian canola. I think everybody in the audience probably has a good sense generally of what those challenges have been. But essentially, it's an issue involving Canada, China, and the United States, and some positioning on tariffs of certain products and how that has impacted the market access for Canadian canola products to China, and how those issues with China need to be counterbalanced with the relationship that Canada has with the United States. In a nutshell, we have an issue where there is a triangulation between these 3 countries in the relationship, but I would couch it as Canada kind of being stuck in the middle. And again, I'll talk a little bit more in subsequent slides in terms of how the biofuels opportunity, especially here in Canada, can serve as an important hedge against issues like geopolitical challenges between different markets that are very important to Canadian canola. So despite some of those geopolitical challenges, I would say overall and characterize that the canola crush industry is hanging in there. We have not had a terrific year in 2025. It's hard to have a terrific year when you are facing challenges like we do in some of the largest markets that we have in China, for example. But all things told, we have seen utilization of our capacity hold relatively steady. Again, I don't want to give anybody the impression that we've had a terrific year on canola crush. We've had some real challenges, especially when there was the imposition of tariffs for canola oil and meal to China. But things have improved over the last half of this year, where we see utilization rates for canola crush capacity reach more, I'll call it normal levels, which is hovering at around 90% utilization of existing canola crush capacity. Now we'll tuck into some of the meat and potatoes of the presentation and the biofuel story that is evolving for canola over the last number of years. It's been quite remarkable in terms of how much canola has started to flow into biofuel markets. Even in the recent past, we have seen almost a doubling. In some cases, you look at these numbers, it could even be a tripling in terms of what canola's utilization in biofuels has been. And when we talk about biofuels, we're talking really about two distinct fuels that are important for canola. We're talking about biodiesel and we're talking about renewable diesel. Those products are different. Biodiesel is a fuel that is been around for, probably at least 15, if not 20 years. It's more the traditional fuel, if you will, in terms of what people will often associate with a biofuel that uses a feedstock like canola. It has some limitations in terms of how it can be used in the existing engines, in terms of how it can be used in the existing infrastructure for diesel fuel. But it's a terrific product with ultimately what its objective is to lower the emissions from traditional fossil fuels. The other fuel that is very important to canola and growing in importance in terms of its use in the fuel sector is renewable diesel. Renewable diesel, again, it's made from feedstocks like canola, like soybeans and things of that nature, but it's different than biodiesel because it is chemically indistinguishable from fossil diesel. So the issues that I mentioned around biodiesel having limitations associated with its use in engines and how it can be using in existing infrastructure, that doesn't exist with renewable diesel because it is a product that is identical in terms of its chemical composition to fossil diesel, and that gives it some significant advantages. All that to say, what we have seen occur in recent years with regards to canola's utilization in biofuels has been steady, if not very impressive growth in some of the key markets where renewable diesel and biodiesel are consumed. With the United States being the most important market recently for canola utilization, but the Canadian market starting to pick up steam because of the programs and policies like the Clean Fuel Regulation. And the EU always, and likely in the future as well, continue to be an important market for our seed exports and the utilization of those seed exports in the EU's biofuel market. So where is all this waste feedstock coming from? How much used cooking oil could there possibly be in Canada and the United States? And how much tallow could there possibly be in both of our countries? And the answer to that question is the supplies within our own borders are very limited. Most of that increase in terms of the market share of waste feedstock and biofuel programs in Canada, United States, it's coming from outside of North America. You'll see on the left-hand side of this slide where the waste feedstock, the volume of the waste feedstock that is coming into North America over the last number of years. And it's been remarkable to see how quickly this waste feedstock from around the world started to funnel into the North American marketplace because of the different biofuel incentives that I had mentioned earlier. Again, the fact that they are lower carbon intensity, so they earn more incentive when they are utilized in biofuels compared to agricultural feedstock like canola or soybeans. In any regard, just to illustrate how much we've seen in terms of volume of these waste feedstock coming into the marketplace, in 2024, it reached almost 3 million tons of used cooking oil and inedible tallow from other origins coming into North America. And again, as I mentioned on the previous slide, eating the lunch, taking market share away from the agricultural feedstock like canola and soybeans. There's also a question about this waste feedstock that's coming from other origins outside of North America. Is it really waste? Is the question that many in the industry are asking. There is unfortunately widespread fraud that is, or maybe I should recharacterize this. There is the potential for a lot of fraud to occur in the trade of some of these waste feedstock. Again, as I've mentioned a couple times already, these waste feedstock are able to earn a higher incentive compared to other feedstocks. So there's a natural incentive, if you will, for fraudulent behavior to occur, whereby products like used cooking oil could be blended with other virgin oils like palm oil, which is a very high carbon feedstock, in fact, but then being labeled or mischaracterized as a UCO to take advantage of some of these incentives that exist in the biofuel programs, both in Canada and the United States. So this is a problem that we think needs to be recognized, and a problem that we think also needs to be addressed, because the last thing that we want to see is to have biofuel policy and regulation in Canada and the United States that are meant to do a number of things as it relates to energy diversification, as it relates to providing opportunity for agriculture producers. The one thing you want to not see happen in these programs is to incentivize or encourage fraudulent behavior. So in regards to addressing some of those concerns and at the same time optimizing the market share for agricultural products like canola and soybeans in North America, it's important that we look at the policies that exist today and develop them or adjust them in a manner that does support the overarching objectives of these biofuel programs, which is to support local farmers and agriculture. A terminology that is starting to surface in the policy discussions of biofuel programs on both sides of our border is a ring fence approach, whereby feedstock from the, let's say, USMCA or CUSMA countries would be prioritized. That's not to suggest that the feedstock coming from other countries would not be eligible to come into these markets. We want to make sure that there is optionality for feedstock. We think that's important for biofuel producers and also for the integrity and the future of these biofuel markets. But we think it would be very sensible, again, to address some of those issues that I outlined previously, to ring fence North America, put a preference, prioritize the feedstock that are sourced here within our own markets. So again, that these biofuel programs deliver on their intent to support local farmers and agriculture. So overall, despite me going through some of those challenges just moments ago, the road ahead, I believe, and many in our industry believe, is bright, but we do need to be mindful of these hurdles, and these hurdles do need to be addressed. So in addition to some of the topics that I covered on the risks of imported feedstock, possible fraudulent behavior with products like used cooking oil, I think there's lots of room to be optimistic. But again, we need to design smart policy to address some of these risks. I believe, we believe that we can be the masters of our own destiny, but we need to make sure that we are, again, putting together smart policy that can support agricultural producers. So that takes me to the end of the presentation. Again, I thank everybody for their attention and welcome any opportunities to follow up afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I do believe we have Chris online to answer questions.
Yep, I'm here.
Hi, Chris.
Oh.
Okay, I don't see any, okay, so we have microphones out. So if you have questions, you can go to the microphones. Or maybe I'll turn it over to Mark and see if there's any online questions for Chris.
Hello. Yes, thanks, Chris. Yeah, we do have one online. We could start with that one if the room is still pondering questions. Question from James Clough, University of M. I'll have to scroll past that bit. If canola biodiesel is chemically the same as regular diesel, is there the same risk of pollution from canola diesel? So
It's a good question, and maybe just to clarify that renewable diesel is the product that is chemically the same as fossil diesel. Fundamentally, any fuel that is made from a renewable feedstock like canola is going to have a significantly lower carbon footprint than fossil diesel. And I say that because, one, it's a renewable feedstock that's being used, and the renewable feedstock like canola, or any other crop for that matter, does sequester the CO2 that is emitted by the fuel. So from its life cycle perspective, the fuels that are produced from crops like canola, again, are going to have a lower carbon footprint than the fossil alternative. Good question.
Thank you. So any questions from the floor?
Behind you.
Yeah. The question I have is, what percentages of waste stock what percentage of market share does waste stock take away from our own industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, technology was imperfect. And I think the slides that were speaking to that exact question were skipped, or they kind of flipped through them pretty quickly. That's probably my fault in terms of the recording I sent. But the market share that waste feedstock currently have in the Canadian biofuel market is approximately 50%. And in the market in the United States, it's also growing to something close to 40 to 50% as well. Currently in Canada, canola has approximately 25% market share. And again, from our perspective, very disappointing, given that the programs that are constructed here in Canada, and I'll use the Clean Fuel Regulation as an example, we as canola stakeholders worked very hard to help develop that program very deliberately as a hedge against market access challenges like we're facing in China today. So to only have 25% of the market share is disappointing, and we have put solutions in the window in terms of how the market share for crops like canola used in biofuels in Canada can increase. And again, you saw some of the concepts I put in the presentation around preferences for Canadian or US feedstock, that North American ring fence approach. We believe that is a sensible and logical policy option for government to consider to help increase the market share for canola in Canada's biofuel market.
Question. I think that palm oil being added to the feedstock of the waste oil is really unfair for canola producer in Canada. And I'm wondering, so what the percentage of that one, palm oil being added in the waste feedstock?
Right now, the percentage of waste feedstock used in Canada for biofuel production is 50%. Again, it's unfortunate that one of the slides that illustrates that was glossed over in the presentation, but it shows a pie chart that has a breakdown of the percentages of different feedstock used in the Canadian biofuel program. What's even more frustrating with regards to that 50% market share that waste feedstock enjoys, it is primarily waste feedstock that is coming from outside of North America. So I'll reiterate a little bit of how I answered the last question. We build these markets in Canada, in the United States, to a large degree for the benefit of agriculture producers, and to see that our lunch is being eaten by imported feedstock is extremely frustrating to us and something that needs to be addressed.
Thank you.
Do we have any more online questions?
I'll ask one, Sally.
Okay.
The question is about the price point of palm oil. You showed a figure of being mixed with the used cooking oil. Does palm oil on its own compete with canola if it doesn't have those credits associated with it? And a second follow-up question, is there a way to analytically distinguish when used cooking oil has been adulterated with virgin oil?
Two really good questions. So with regards to palm and its price point globally, I'd say, and this is a generality, but let's say 90% of the time, palm oil is priced below that of other vegetable oils out there. And these days it's also priced below used cooking oil because used cooking oil is in such high demand. So that just in and of itself creates a significant incentive for palm oil to be blended with used cooking oil for traders and operators to capture the highest price. And just that in and of itself is clearly fraudulent behavior. But what makes matters worse is that palm oil is a very high carbon feedstock, and there are guardrails, very intentional guardrails, for example, in the clean fuel regulation that do not allow for palm oil to be used in the clean fuel regulation market. This is not unique to Canada in terms of palm oil's exclusion. There are similar limitations in the EU, and there are similar limitations in the programs in the United States. So it's really a double whammy. It's fraud, which is really the issue we're pointing to, and it's also the issue of undermining why these programs are also built in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, because palm is something that is, again, a high carbon feedstock, and its life cycle emissions are actually very comparable to the emissions of standard fossil diesel. To your second question on, is there an analytical methodology to test for the composition of these used cooking oil? The short answer to that question is no, there isn't. Certainly there isn't one that I'm aware of. There is a lot of research and work going into it, and we are confident that at some point we will see a methodology, a practical one that can be used in real time with regards to testing the composition, but currently there is nothing in place, which is again something that we point to with regards to a limitation. We are highly suspicious. In some cases, we are almost certain that some level of fraud is occurring, but there's no way to test for it. So without a testing methodology, we really think that there needs to be a revisiting of allowing these types of feedstock into our marketplace.
Okay, we have time for one more question if there's one more online.
I think we've covered most of the online questions. They were concerning palm oil.
Okay. There was one more from the crowd then. We could take.
Thank you for your nice presentation. I think that looking at biofuels is very tempting because it's such a big market, and obviously that's a place to go. But you didn't mention anything about other industrial applications. And I wonder if other oleochemical applications, such as we see especially for palm oil, but also soybean and flax, wouldn't be a good place to look, and I just wonder why you didn't mention that.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and we are very focused on biofuels because it is this significant demand draw, and of course we are hoping it can serve as a stable hedge against these geopolitical challenges that we face. But you're absolutely right. There is definitely a need to look at other applications in terms of industrial uses of products like canola oil. I know that For example, I think you highlight soybean oil as one vegetable oil that is being used today for, I believe, upholstery and tire production for the automobile manufacturing industry. So given that soybean oil and canola oil are very similar in terms of their chemical composition, there's certainly some opportunity for canola oil to be used in that regard as well. But it is not something that the COPA has really spent a lot of time on, but it is a topic that is certainly worth discussing as it relates to future opportunities.
Definitely. Thank you.
So thank you, Chris, for your excellent presentation, and thank you, Chris, and all the lively discussion that happened today. So we're going to move on to Zoe Wallace, who is a policy manager with the U.S. Canola Association. And she's going to be talking about trades, tariffs, and MAHA, shaping the future of U.S. canola.
Good morning. My name is Zoe Wallace. I'm the policy manager for the U.S. Canola Association, and I've been asked to present on a couple of very interesting topics that have been keeping us very busy lately. Those would be trade, tariffs, and the Make America Healthy Again movement. So to give you a brief idea of what we're going to be talking about, we'll break down the tariffs into three sections. Those would be the IEEPA tariffs, and that is the presidential's power and how he imposed tariffs, the timeline of U.S. tariffs and what the last year has looked like, as well as trade agreements that the U.S. has currently been either working on or has signed. We'll then switch over to the MAHA report and talk about all things MAHA, both at the national and state level, and then I'll leave out some time for questions. Going over the trade and tariffs, one of the most important things to understand if you're not familiar with the U.S. tariff landscape or what this last year has looked like is that the president used a power called IEEPA. That's the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. Now, I did put the text of the IEEPA carved out here because I think it's really important to understand the language of this text. It's why we are now looking at a Supreme Court case. So IEEPA states that it gives the US president broad powers to regulate commerce after declaring a national emergency in response to an unusual and extraordinary threat. Now, the Supreme Court is currently deliberating on if the president has the power to impose tariffs within this IEEPA case. I could actually speak on this for an entire hour. I'm not even a lawyer. It's really interesting if you ask lawyers and have them start to analyze and break down these topics. A lot of people aren't sure. They're calling it a coin flip on how the Supreme Court's going to rule. It might even be a partial ruling. A lot of what the Supreme Court is held up on is this word regulate right here. And does regulate mean that they can impose tariffs? As well as some justices were struggling with national emergency and unusual and extraordinary threat. Because how do you have an unusual and extraordinary threat, but yet apply tariffs to every country so blankly as the president did? So we are currently awaiting the Supreme Court's hearing. They did hear the case on November 5th. We're all anxiously waiting. Hopefully before the holidays, we will get that ruling, but it might be several months after that as well. However, I think it's also important to note that even if the Supreme Court says the president does not have power to implement tariffs under IEEPA, there's still other measures this administration is looking at to impose tariffs in other manners. I wrote down the most three common ways that they would probably do this. The first being Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. Now, the thing about this is it only gives the president power to implement tariffs up to 15% for 150 days without congressional approval. You also have your standard Section 301 or Section 232 tariffs. These are a very legal way for the president to impose tariffs. However, to do this, there does need to be an investigation by USTR. These tariffs would be your more standard steel and aluminum tariffs or other sectorial tariffs. You also have another measure that the administration has begun looking at, which would be Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930. This gives the president power to impose tariffs up to 50%, but specifically on a country found to be discriminating against the US. And so I think the administration would again struggle with how do you blankly use this threat of tariffs on any country whenever the president wants, because you would have to be proving some level of discrimination. I also, before I move on to the next slide, I do want to point out this picture right here. We will start talking about those Liberation Day tariffs, and this will give you an idea of what the president held up on April 2nd when he imposed those tariffs. Just to briefly go over this, I know it cuts out the country a little bit, but this first country, for example, is China, followed by the European Union. And when the president announced tariffs on April 2nd, which were the first set of tariffs, I know it's changed a few times over the last few months, he said that the USTR decided the tariff rate for each country based on a formula. And this came from the National Estimating Report. You can actually find that on the USTR website if you're curious about the non-tariff barriers being outlined for each country. But they came up with a formula which came up with a broad generic tariff rate for that country. So for example, China, the first one, is 67%, followed by the European Union at 39%. The president then said, what we're going to do to determine our reciprocal tariff rate is cut that rate in half. So China's at 67%. We will then charge a 34% tariff rate back. The European Union is at 39%. We were then going to charge 20%. Again, we'll go over the timeline of these tariffs. Things started to change even days after this announcement, and so we will break down that. But I did want to point out this picture to help you visualize what we were looking at on Liberation Day. Brief timeline of what we looked at. I did cut it out in August 27th. I feel like there was a lot of movement between March and August, and things have calmed down a little. We've seen more trade negotiations coming out. As far as tariff codes changing, tariff rates changing, though, I do think things have slowed down just a little bit. So in March, we did see an expansion of steel and aluminum tariffs. They were increased to 25%. And something that was really notable was that Mexico was no longer exempt from these. Essentially, the U.S. found that Mexico was allowing a lot of circumnavigation, specifically from China, and this administration said no more. April 2nd, I know a lot of people called it Liberation Day. I've also heard it called D-Day. That is the day that I was just referring to when the president held up a big board with those tariff rates and those reciprocal rates and announced that we would be implementing tariffs. Again, those rates came from the National Trade Estimating Report. It's released once a year. And if you're curious about some of those non-tariff barriers or barriers being outlined, you can go and find that report. It is public. April 8th, just a few days later, Trump lowered all reciprocal tariffs except for China to 10% for 90 days. He cited that we were doing this because so many countries were coming to the table willing to negotiate, and China began escalating. We did go back and forth with them. I would have to go back and check that tariff rate, but I believe it ended at 125% when a brief truce was called. However, something else notable was happening during this time period. The US bond market began crashing, and I do believe that the president was watching this, and it did force him to press pause a little bit to allow our market to stabilize, which was the 90-day pause. Now, May 14th, China and the US did agree to that 90-day tariff truce, and the deal was that the US would only impose a 30% rate in exchange for lowering all those tariff rates, and that this would go on until, I believe, November 10th, which it was looked at recently and a truce was signed. June 4th, we saw more Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs. They were doubled. I do represent other grower groups, specifically barley, and this was a huge concern for them because of those beer cans. And so that's kind of an example of how you're seeing the ag world react. It might be more of a secondary reaction for something that they use or a product they use, but it definitely is impacting them in the prices. July 8th, tariffs were extended once again to August 7th to allow further negotiations. Now, I do believe the administration started to see how long these trade agreements, were taking to come to terms with. You know, you look at the USMCA, for example, that was an agreement that took a lot of time. It took a lot of people, a lot of hands to get a great agreement. And I think this administration started to realize how long some of these agreements could actually take. Now, you did start to see the announcement of some trade agreements come to the table. For example, the UK was the first. We'll talk about that in the next slide. And on July 31st, the individual tariff rates were announced under IEEPA, set to go into effect August 7th. Now, I think this is important. He announced the tariff rates prior to implementing them. I think this is something the administration did learn back in April when they announced them and we saw the bond market start to crash. This way, by announcing them ahead of time, they were able to watch things and determine how the market might react. Now, August 11th, the China tariff truce was extended till November 10th. Again, last week or 2 weeks ago, we did sign a 1-year tariff truce, and we'll break down that in a couple slides. Also on August 21st, the US and the EU released a joint statement on their framework. That was the intention to come to a trade agreement. In exchange, the US would be lowering their tariff rate to 15%. And on August 27th, we did see an additional 25% tariff on India for their purchases of Russian oil and gas. Now, I think a lot of this is actually broken down into frustrations between the two countries as they work out that trade agreement. Hopefully, we still will see one, though, in the coming year or 2 years. So trade agreements, what are we looking at now? The original goal was 90 deals in 90 days. I'll let you decide if you think we're at that or not. I believe a lot of that would depend how you look at the EU and is it one country or 27 member states? Now, the first country to sign an agreement was May 8th. That would be the UK. Something very interesting happened when the UK signed that trade agreement, though. Their tariff rate was still kept at 10%. And this was a signal that even with negotiations, you're probably still looking at some form of a tariff rate. I mean, when you look at the UK, we trade in a surplus, and yet we're still going to keep some form of a rate on them. 10%, which was what the initial reciprocal tariff rate, if you recall, was lowered for every country for those 90 days as we were working out deals. Other trade agreements we've seen would be Malaysia, Cambodia, and Japan. Those were signed just a few weeks ago. And we've also seen announced frameworks with Thailand, Vietnam, the EU, Argentina, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Ecuador. I apologize if I missed any. They come at us very quickly, and we try to stay on top of them all. Also, South Korea, they did something very interesting. They have an agreement specifically to build ships for the United States. Now, this is very interesting because if you're tracking our Section 301 fees, we were about to impose pretty hefty fees for any Chinese-built ship that comes into the US. This was a huge concern for ag commodity groups because most ships are Chinese built and we don't have the infrastructure to just start manufacturing US ships within this next year where farmers or growers or exporters could avoid these fees. Also, I do just want to outline the difference between a joint framework and an agreement. I do think the news sometimes confuses the two. They like to announce a lot of countries as agreements, and that's not necessarily true. If you're ever questioning it, I would suggest going to the White House website. They do put out not only great fact sheets, but also they will release those joint frameworks or agreements. And based on that terminology, you'll know what you're looking at. A joint framework is just a joint statement coming out and saying that we've come to the table and we've decided we are going to work on a deal. Maybe it's one page outlining what some of the provisions of that deal will look like, but it is in no means a signed, sealed agreement. A trade agreement is a signed deal that is completed. Again, I just think it's really important that you distinguish between the two. It's really easy for the media to confuse those two and start announcing all of these agreements that are out there, even when negotiations are still continuing. On the left, I do have some of the adjusted tariff rates that have come out in recent months as either frameworks have come out or agreements have come out. Again, just because you don't have an agreement doesn't mean the tariff rate wasn't adjusted. The EU being a great example, there is no signed agreement. Actually, Undersecretary Lindbergh and Ambassador Greer have been in Europe quite frequently the last few weeks trying to move that deal forward. However, we have decided that their tariff rate would be 15% for working with us. There has been some contention on this as progress seems to have been slowed, and some feel that we should remove this 15% tariff rate. Moving on to some other trade agreements, China, that would be one of the big ones that we saw in the last few weeks. It's a one-year truce, not a trade agreement. I should be very careful about the terminology I use. And what was decided is that China would suspend all retaliatory tariffs announced since March 4th, and also remove any retaliation that they took against the US Section 301 investigation. Those are the port fees I was just talking about. In exchange, the US will lower the tariffs on Chinese fentanyl to 10%. And for 1 year, the US would suspend their Section 301 investigation. Again, that's the port fees that were set to go into effect just a few weeks ago, which was a huge win for growers. We also did begin seeing some purchases, specifically of soybeans, start to move back through China, which was a huge deal for growers. Something else I want to note, the USMCA, that's a huge topic coming up. It is up for review this summer, and it's something I think as it gets closer and closer, you're going to begin hearing more and more about. The US has been moving through their process, starting with selecting comments from commodity groups or anyone else who wants to submit comments. We did submit comments. If you're wondering what the importance of the USMCA, one thing I want to highlight is during all of this uncertainty, USMCA products have had a 0% tariff rate. And I think that highlights one of the really important reasons that we should have this strong deal, maintain the strong trilateral agreement, and get it renewed as quickly as possible. If you're wondering what happens if we cannot come to the table and this review moves forward quickly and swiftly, if not renewed, a 10-year countdown will begin to the end of USMCA. Now, I am going to switch over to the MAHA report and all things MAHA, another issue that's been very interesting for canola specifically because, as you know, it is a seed oil. I actually represent sunflowers and canola, so it's been a very interesting time the last few months. Back in May, the MAHA Commission did release a report. It specifically focused on ultra-processed foods, pesticides, and food additives. It was very concerning for all ag groups, not just seed oil groups, but all ag groups because of what that report could mean. Following the report, we did know policy recommendations would be coming out of the White House just several months later. And this report was largely written by Callie Means. If you're interested in the type of rhetoric that he says or his beliefs, he's written several books, very interesting. But to give you kind of a preface, he's against seed oils, he's against pesticides, and so we weren't really surprised by this report. Now, I didn't want to put so much text on this slide, but I think it's important that you see this paragraph right here that I did pull out of the report, specifically because not only is seed oils named, but canola is named specifically. This was seen as very bad for our industry and what it would mean if consumers latched onto these words and started moving away from seed oils, as we've already seen this last year from trends from Instagram and TikTok, for example. So the MAHA report, how did we react? Ag groups from all corners came out, and what we essentially told the White House is we felt like we should have been consulted before this report was written. All of our industries have stacks and stacks of research that we would be happy to provide and work with the White House to come up with another form of this report to make America healthy again. But that also doesn't only hurt farmers, but also that it sticks with the science and the science-based facts. The White House began meeting with food groups, including the American Farm Bureau, as well as many others. And Secretary Rollins did come out publicly and say that she felt the report could do better. Now, the U.S. Canola Association, we began engaging not only with the Seed Oils Coalition that we're a part of, but we sent letters to Secretaries Rollins, Kennedy, and the White House regarding these claims made to seed oils and providing all the research that we had compiled over the years that essentially debunked these claims that they were making. Following widespread engagement from all areas, I am happy to report that all mention of seed oils was removed from the MAHA policy recommendations that were released just a few months later. And Callie Means has officially departed the White House. As part of his political appointee position, he could only serve for 130 days. However, he has now moved over as a political advisor to HHS, and they are currently responsible for developing the dietary guidelines. So it is something we are still remaining to stay on top of. And I believe this will be my last slide. Just to kind of go over some of the seed oils issues, actually what we're looking at isn't just seed oils at a national level, it's at a state level, which is really concerning because state legislation in this manner can almost act as a federal ban. For example, if California decides to ban, say, red dye 40, Fruit Loops isn't going to necessarily create two different versions to sell in the US. They're going to just remove it from their product and it acts as that federal ban. Now, we've seen a lot of restaurants and fast food move away from seed oils. This is something really hard for us to combat because restaurants do have that prerogative to make a choice how they're cooking and what they're providing in their foods. Now, we have seen this from Steak and Shake as well as Shake Shack. Starbucks even over the summer announced that they were considering it. Luckily, we haven't seen anything further come from that. A lot of this state legislation has been inspired by MAHA, and a lot of these bills specifically look at banning certain food dyes or seed oils in school meals, as well as labeling disclosures, for example, having to disclose if you cook with seed oils. On the left here, I have a picture of all of the state legislation that's come out recently that includes seed oils in some way. The one highlighted in yellow, the Louisiana bill, is the only one that has actually passed. However, we're keeping a close eye on the other ones as well to see how they move through their process. Something else I want to note, hopefully if my slides are able to be shared after, you guys can take a look at this website. MAHA has created their own website. And I want to point this out because it's a great way to see what they're putting out there, what their beliefs are. They actually have their own state legislation tracker, which honestly, it makes our lives a little bit easier. They put out videos and it helps us understand their thought process and where they're coming from to better advocate for those science-based policies and to stay on top of some of the narrative that's coming out of there. Again, it's been a really interesting conversation and time. This has been a topic that's so interesting to cover because it's not necessarily a federal policy issue. It's a consumer issue. It's an education issue. And it's something we're continuing to stay engaged on. And with that, I'd like to thank you for inviting me out here to speak on tariffs as well as MAHA policy. I've put my contact info there and I'm happy to answer any questions if you might have them. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. I understand that we have Zoe online to answer a few questions. Do we have any online questions for Zoe, Mark? No? Okay. Any questions from the room? Okay, well, thank you so much, Zoe, for an excellent presentation. So our last presentation of the session is from Simon North, who is an agronomy lead with Fertilizer Canada. And he's going to be presenting on revised for our best management practices. So I'd like to invite Simon to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. You can see the first slide. I'm just going to go over some of the stuff we're working with Fertilizer Canada. So just a quick background on Fertilizer Canada. We represent the fertilizer industry in Canada with the producers, manufacturers, and retailers. I'm part of the nutrients team, and we represent the agronomists, the agronomy side of things, nutrient management side of things. And just going to go over some of the work we've been doing on the new 4R guidance tables and the 4R plan template. I got to collaborate with Dan Heaney on this. He did a lot of the work on this, and 4R Integrity Working Group. I'm just going to represent what we've been doing there. So just a quick background. I know most of you are probably familiar with the 4R nutrient program. We actually part of the, it's kind of a science-based background program. We work on the right source, the rate, time, and place of fertilizer. It's been around for quite a while, and it helps farmers and the fertilizer industry produce crops efficiently in a more sustainable way without reducing losses to the environment. It's a Canadian program across the country. We have provincial agreements actually across most provinces. It's provincially managed. Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec. We just signed this year with Alberta, PEI. We also have, as mentioned, the 4R Integrity Working Group, and they've been behind a lot of this work that with redoing the 4R tables. We have our research network. We have academics and government scientists across the country that we work on various committees as well. We also do the very comprehensive fertilizer use survey, which you're familiar with. We annually survey farmers across the country on their fertilizer use practices. It's not a production use of tonnage report. That comes from StatsCan, but this is a fertilizer use survey where we individually use a third-party research company, and they individually research growers across the country. It's getting very popular, and it's actually one of the biggest sources now of fertilizer use, and we're getting a lot of demand, and it's a trusted source of particularly with 4R use and how that's evolving. We also have our 4R agri-retail program, which I'm going to talk about the designation program, particularly in the West, in Western provinces. In Ontario, they have a certification program, which is a little different. So a bit of background on the 4R tables. There are best management practice tables, so what the individual grower would use to comply with 4Rs. So they were last updated in 2019, and they had the best management practices and how they can integrate into their 4R management plans. They were kind of getting outdated, so we decided to update them. So last year we got together with the 4R Integrity Working Group, and it was led by Dr. Dan Heaney. And the working group comprises of senior agronomists from all our Fertilizer Canada members, and all the ones that are particularly engaged in 4R. So we got a lot of feedback, and we had several discussions with them on how we were going to update these tables. This has been going on for just over a year now. So as I say, we met with the working groups, we proposed updates, and we've been meeting kind of regularly with our research network scientists. These are real experts in the field of 4R and nutrient management. And we proposed the best management practices for implication, particularly on nitrous oxide reduction and on phosphorus loss. And we've been meeting monthly until June this year, and then we finally finalized the tables this summer. Just quickly, a couple of highlights, some main changes. So, the old tables, they were based on cereals, oilseeds, canola, and pulse rotations, and in Manitoba we did corn and soybean. In the east, we covered corn, soybeans, winter wheat, and PEI was potato-based. But there was no guidance on manure use or potash, sulfur, or any excluded practices. So what we've done there's a major change. We're moving away from like a rotational approach to more crop-specific. They're structured more like split into dry and humid regions. We also have guidance on manure use now. But I think one of the biggest changes is we've actually stated the excluded practices. I'll give us some examples here in a bit, but they're now across Canada, and now they're crop-specific. They're non-crop specific, pardon me. And we also have them split into humid and dry regions. So that's just one example of what a table will look like. We've improved it on setting levels and with the new revised principles. So we basically kept the same format, The intermediate, as you can see there, the level is basic, intermediate, and advanced. And then there's the source rate, time, place, the 4 hours on the top. This is one particular slide. And so we've kept that same format, kind of easy for agronomists and growers to use. So I know that slide's looking a little cluttered there, but this is just one example. What we've done is we've simplified the table, but we've put explanatory notes on the side. So when you go into the tables, you'll be able to see why we've made that change for this, and we made it a bit cleaner. As you can see there, we've got right source, we've got ammonium-based formulation, why we use ammonium-based formulation, and why UAN is excluded. Reason for that, and then there's like a science little part, and there's a lot of more appendices, but the table itself is a lot cleaner. And if you want more details, there's on the side there. Again, this is the right time example. So why do this is a reason why we apply nitrogen in the fall after the soil is cooled down to a certain temperature. But there's the calculation there, rather than trying to put it in the table and read it from there. This is why there's an example of how the calculation is done, and then there's the science below, why the scientists came up with that rationale. We've done it for, as I say, we've done it for consistency with the 4R principles. Anything that does not meet 4R criteria now will be identified and prioritized for each grower or agronomist to work on. The best management practice may not be acceptable in another region, but it's more based on cropping systems, climate, and some cases local regulations. And the excluded practices are shown to the right. So example, I place them right at the bottom there. There's no application on snow or frozen ground. Before it was like a gray area, now it's actually stated in the tables. So that was the table part of things. Now I'm just going to go over quickly on the 4R template update for the plans. We have a lot of our agronomists. We have over 600 designated agronomists in the western provinces that use regular 4R planning. There's been more of a demand for 4R usage. We see that in the fertilizer use survey, particularly with newer generation of growers. So we're giving more tools out to our agronomists to help farmers plan using 4R practices. So we've done an update here because a lot of the old planning template was specific to a specific protocol like the Alberta NERP, which is more tied to nitrous oxide reduction. So this one is going to be more for across the country for 4R planning. I apologize for the side, but we're working with a software company. We're going to do all the actual internal planning. This is some of all the stuff we're working on, but basically it was developed in 2013, as I say, to work with basically with NERP, which is the nitrogen emissions reduction protocol, which is quite specific to it, which was part of the Alberta environment part of things. But now we've found that a lot of our members actually developed their own, and it left the one we have kind of outdated and not usable. So we initiated the update last year. And again, my colleague Dan Heaney, he's been working with our integrity working group to redo this. And we actually got it finished here last month. And we're going to be publishing it very soon on our updated website. As I say, we're trying to make a fit-for-purpose plan. Depends on the needs of the end user. And a lot of our members were be able to use it and adopt it for their own usage with their own agronomists and into their own recording systems. It also provides explanations and guidance with the new tables. So we have the tables have all been approved by all our working groups, and they're going to be published next month officially. We've done a few soft launches. But we didn't want to confuse with our 2025 for our acre count, which is underway right now, where we count all the acres that have been for our plans across the country for 2025 from our agri-retailers and agronomists. So they still apply for the 2025 current best management practice tables. So we're going to do a clean slate in January. And we also have our updated new e-learning courses, which we have on our website. They're also going to reflect the new best management practice tables. That they should be updated by March. And we also have the new website coming up, and the commercial data layer, which I mentioned with the FAR template, that's going to hopefully be developed by April 2026. So that was a quick overview on some of the stuff we're working on the nutrient side. It's pretty fast moving, so look out in the next few months on our website. We'll have all the tools and resources, but in the meantime, you can reach out to myself. I'm part of the nutrients team. My email's there. I believe there's some time for some questions, but I'll be around for the rest of the day if you need any further information on some of the stuff we're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, so we do have some time for questions. I'll look at Mark first to see if there's any online questions.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Yeah, we do have one online question. Does your research network address 4R in relation to precision ag nitrogen management related to yield zones within fields?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're actually, because it's kind of a newer practice, we don't have a lot of data on kind of, if you're referring to the variable rate, but we do quote it in our advanced tables, so it is an advance for our practice. So it's going to be an evaluation of more and more data coming through on these newer practices, and then we talk about variable rate, sectional control, things like that. So they are identified in the advanced practices, yeah.
Okay, I don't see any questions from the floor. Are there any more online? No. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Simon, for an excellent presentation. Okay, thanks to all of our speakers this session. We're going to move into coffee now. Coffee this morning is sponsored by Alberta Canola. I wanted to bring to your attention that we do have another poster presentation this year. So coffee will be served, coffee and snacks will be served in the room to your left. And there's also research posters by various presenters that are set up there. And how that will work is the odd number posters. The presenters will be with their posters morning and afternoon coffee today, and the even posters tomorrow. So a good chance to engage with several different researchers. And just a reminder about the dine around. Again, this is the small group dinner that you can sign up for. So visit the rear table to sign up for that. And again, you need to sign up before 1 p.m. So we're going to reconvene at 10:55 for our annual crop updates and report session.
And you are a teacher.